The negotiating with someone who has hostages and you're interested in bringing back the hostages live is negotiating in a completely imbalanced power relations. The Hamas, when it comes to the hostages, Hamas has the negotiation upper hand. Why? Because Hamas has better alternative. Power in negotiation depends mostly on to what extent you have an alternative to pursue your interest.
Joining us now is Moty Cristal. Moty is a former Israeli military chief who was previously involved in negotiating with Hamas. It's taken 7 weeks to get here. How does a deal like this happen, Moty? How much has been going on in the background? Is this a deal that you think the bones of which might have actually been sort of put together many weeks beforehand? How does something like this come together?
Well, things are coming together during weeks, and compared to previous deals, which took much longer, I think that relatively it was agreed as a result mostly of the international pressure and the context during which so many kids, babies, women, Holocaust survivors are held in Hamas brutal captivity. This context, as well as Israel military action in Gaza, accelerated the thing. The outline of what is called or what is defined now as humanitarian deal the outline was agreed on a relatively early stage with mainly the U.S. involvement before Israel ground operation started 3-4 weeks ago. And since then, with ups and downs, with communication failures, with internal dynamics amongst the various mediators, mediating roles, Qatar, Egypt, the US. It was agreed last week, and yesterday it was first step was implemented, was executed.
Mm. It's interesting you say that the Americans, of course, have had a huge role in this, as have other states, and this was something that has been talked about for a number of weeks. But of course, trust is very important in a deal like this. There's not a lot of trust between Israel and Hamas. How fragile is this deal, Moty? What could go wrong?
Well, I'm smiling when you say trust is essential, because I think that this is a very, I would say, Western concept of trust, and most of us grew up in classic negotiation methodologies. We believe that trust is essential and trust is a prerequisite. And from our experience in this very tense negotiations, and I would not mention, of course, divorce negotiations, you see that many negotiations are actually end up with a good agreement, despite the fact that the parties has zero trust in one another, actually would like to kill the other side rather than negotiate. But because you cannot achieve your goals, your interest, you cannot get what you want if you will kill the other side, then you have to negotiate. And the whole concept of negotiating with people whom you don't trust is how you design a strategy which is built on what we called low to no trust. And it is based on respecting the other side, which is not necessarily trust. It builds on a very carefully selected or carefully identified third-party involvement, third-party intervention, which goes beyond the classic mediation concepts, and of course a certain guarantee, or what hostage negotiators call trust in the process. What we saw yesterday, smooth implementation, was the first step, the first attempt to build some trust in the process, executed through Red Cross, executed through the Egyptian. By the way, as we speak, we got the news here from various resources in Gaza that the second group, which was supposed already to be handed over to Red Cross, is delayed because Hamas conditioned a certain element of the deal, supply trucks to be allowed into northern part of Gaza. According to Hamas, it was not completed. Therefore, they halt at the moment, as we speak, the handover of the second group of hostages to the Red Cross.
Right.
As you mentioned, it's very, very fragile.
It is very, very fragile. Also, what's really interesting, I mean, you make a really, really interesting point about negotiating from a point of low trust. But what's interesting is just looking at some of the deal that's been struck. And there's now talks that for every 10 hostages released by Hamas, there will be one extra day of a pause in fighting. How likely do you think this is?
Well, this is a well-thought incentive mechanism that was agreed in the deal because it serves the interests of both sides. Israel wants as many hostages as possible to be released, and Hamas, they do need additional day of ceasefire in order to further fortify and strengthen their line of defense. It is a mutual interest. Therefore, if Hamas will be able to free the 50 hostages, which they commit, their commitment according to the agreement, then the agreement itself carries some incentive to expand the ceasefire, the truce, in return of other hostages. We have to bear in mind that Hamas does not control all the hostages. During this barbaric attack of October 7th, more than 200 Israeli hostages were taken, but not only by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and worse than that, by various warlords or gangs or crime families whom actually hold some of the hostages. So when Hamas commit to hand over more than 50, it means that Hamas will have to take them or internally negotiate their handover from whoever holds them to the Hamas or to the Red Cross, probably whatever.
That's very interesting. So Hamas might have to actually negotiate internally from these sort of third parties,
exactly.
If you like. But it's such an interesting point you make about this being framed on sort of incentives on both sides. And look, just as we were coming on air, Moty, there was a line breaking saying that hostage negotiators were hoping that there might be an extension to the ceasefire. Can you see any chances of that?
Well, I'll tell you, this news line came, I believe, from Egypt, and not to mention the fact that today a private Qatari jet just landed in Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. Qatar and Egypt are really leading the effort to extend the ceasefire. Each one from their own internal reasoning and interest, and both Qatar and Egypt played and are playing a constructive role in de-escalation. To what extent it fits the interest of Hamas and the interest of Israel, this is still to be proved. But Egypt and Qatar wants this to be the ceasefire to be extended, and again, the current agreement and the current dynamic allow that to happen if, in return, Hamas will hand over hostages. I don't see a scenario during which Hamas prolong the return of hostages and Israel continue to sit and
Okay.
do nothing. That won't happen.
Moty, just one final question before we let you go. One of our listeners has just messaged in and he has got a question for you. He says, please can you ask your guest, why are there more Palestinians being freed compared to Israeli hostages? What is the thinking here?
It's I will take this. It's a very good and fair question, and it is a result of a very poor comment made by one of BBC anchors. She indicated that the ratio of 3 Palestinians for 1 Israeli is an indication of Israel do not that Israel doesn't value life of Palestinians, and that's a complete bias and misinterpretation of the reality. The negotiating with someone who has hostages and you're interested in bringing back the hostages live is negotiating in a completely imbalanced power relations. The Hamas, when it comes to the hostages, Hamas has the negotiation upper hand. Why? Because Hamas has better alternative. Power in negotiation depends mostly on to what extent you have an alternative to pursue your interest. Hamas can leave the hostages in their captivity for years, as they did with Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier who was abducted by Hamas in 2006, and he was kept in captivity for 5 years. In Israel is willing to pay a lot in order to rescue, and it is just a result of the negotiation. 1 to 3 is an interesting ratio when you compare it to Gilad Shalit, who was one soldier who was exchanged for more than 1,000 Palestinians.
Yeah. Well, Moty, that was a really clear explanation on that. Look, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. That's Moty Cristal, who is a former Israeli military chief who has previously been involved in negotiating with Hamas.